Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today we're going deep on something that I think is really foundational, and that's meaningful social connection. We've got a fantastic guide here that pulls from psychology research, neuroscience practical tips. And the goal today is to give all of you listening a real, clear understanding of how to build the kinds of relationships that last.
Yeah, and for you listeners out there, we're trying to help you get to the core, the surprising and really insightful parts of this guide. So you walk away with not just a bunch of information, but those aha moments that make you look at your interactions in a new light without feeling like you're drowning in a sea of research.
Right, exactly. And it's not about becoming some social butterfly or mastering, some slick tricks. Really what this guide emphasizes is creating an environment where the people that you're with feel comfortable, really understood and valued for who they are.
And that feeling of being valued, there's some pretty profound psychology at play. The guide kicks off by talking about this idea of belongingness. And it's a fundamental human need to form these positive, lasting relationships. And it goes back to Baumeister and Leary's work from way back when in the 90s, where they said this isn't just like a nice to have, it's a core human motivator.
It's like we're wired for it, right?
Yeah, and what's really cool is that recent neuroscience is backing this up. Studies show that when we have those positive social interactions, our brain's reward circuitry lights up almost as intensely as it does for things like food or safety.
Wow, so it's not just emotional fluff, it's actually happening in our brains.
Yeah.
So how do we tap into that? How do we foster that sense of belonging in our everyday interactions? Because I feel like a lot of times we hold back.
Yeah, and that's our, inherent social anxieties at play, right?
Yeah.
So the guide recommends taking that step, actively reaching out, starting conversations, showing genuine interest. And it sounds like a no-brainer, but when was the last time you made that effort?
Yeah, absolutely. So building on that initial connection, the guide dives into what they call the trust equation, which I think is a really fascinating framework. It was developed by Meister Green and Galford, and it basically breaks down something as intangible as trust into an equation. Credibility plus reliability plus intimacy, all divided by self-orientation. And what's particularly interesting to me is that denominator.
Yeah, that self-orientation piece.
Yeah, even if you're really credible and reliable, if you're too focused on yourself, it's going to be really difficult to build that deep trust.
Absolutely. And it's not just about being good at your job or being dependable. It's really about where your focus lies. So in practice, this means actively listening more than you talk, consistently following through on those commitments, and creating a space where it's okay to be a little bit vulnerable when it's appropriate, but not making it all about you.
Right, exactly. And it's the little things, like following up with a colleague on something that they mentioned, even if it was just a small point, like you said you would.
Right. Those small actions, they build that foundation of trust.
Yeah, and then reducing that self-orientation. It could be as simple as, noticing when the conversation is drifting towards you and consciously shifting the focus back to the other person.
Yeah.
Did you see that game last night?
Yeah, exactly.
Now, another concept that I thought was really interesting was psychological safety. And I think a lot of people have heard of this, but this is the idea that you can be yourself without the fear of judgment or negative consequences.
And Edmondson's work in this area has been so influential, especially when we think about team dynamics, but I think it's equally important in those one-on-one conversations.
Oh, for sure. For sure. It's about creating an atmosphere where people feel comfortable, sharing different ideas or admitting mistakes or even asking those questions that they might be a little embarrassed to ask.
Yeah, like what they think are the dumb questions.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the guide offers some really practical ways to cultivate this. For example, saying something like, I might be wrong, and then sharing your perspective.
Yeah.
Or admitting when you don't know something right away.
Yeah.
It makes you more relatable and encourages other people to do the same.
Yeah.
And just consistently demonstrating that you're genuinely curious about what other people think.
Right.
That makes all the difference.
Yeah, and I think in a meeting, instead of, feeling like you have to have all the answers, you can say something like, that's a really interesting point. I hadn't considered that. Can you tell me more about your thinking?
Right.
And that just changes the whole dynamic.
It does.
Now, speaking of subtle cues, the guide also touches on mirror neurons, which I think is fascinating. Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting on that neurological level. So what's cool about mirror neurons is that they blur the line between doing and observing. So these brain cells, they fire both when you're doing an action and when you're watching someone else do that same action. And researchers think that this is a fundamental piece of how we empathize and understand other people's intentions. So the guide suggests that you can actually tap into this mirror neuron system by subtly mirroring someone's body language and tone. And this can create a sense of rapport, a sense of connection. It's not about mimicking their every move, which can feel really awkward, but it's more like you're aligning yourself with them. So if someone is, speaking with a relaxed posture and a really calm tone, your own posture might relax a bit and your speaking pace might slow down a little.
Yeah, it's like this unconscious dance of nonverbal communication where
Yeah.
you're kind of saying, hey, we're on the same wavelength.
Right.
So the guy moves into charisma and natural attraction,
Yeah.
which I think everybody wants a little bit more of. And of course, body language is a huge piece of that.
Yeah, huge piece of the puzzle. And the guide emphasizes open posture. So things like uncrossed arms, facing the person you're talking to directly, and making appropriate eye contact. And I know that might sound like common sense, but research shows how powerful these cues are in signaling trustworthiness and engagement. Think about it. If you're talking to someone and their arms are crossed and they're turned slightly away, even if they're saying all the right things, it creates this barrier. So making a conscious effort to keep your posture open can make a really big difference in how you're perceived.
Absolutely. It's about projecting approachability and attentiveness.
Right.
And then there's the concept of power posing, which I think a lot of people have heard of. But this is the idea that if you adopt these expansive postures, you can actually boost your own confidence.
Yeah, and the work by Cuddy and her colleagues has been a bit, controversial in terms of the long-term physiological effects, but they do suggest that there's a link between our posture and our internal state. So the guide recommends, trying these poses out, like standing tall with your hands on your hips or raising your arms in a V shape for a few minutes before a social event or important conversation, just as a way to boost your confidence in that moment.
Like a quick shot of self-assurance.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then we circle back to mirroring, but this time it's specifically about mirroring body language. And research has shown that if you subtly mirror someone's gestures, it can actually increase liking.
Right. So Chartrand and Barg, their research highlighted this chameleon effect where unconscious mimicry fosters connection and rapport. And again, subtlety is key here. It's not about being a copycat, but more like after a slight delay, you might subtly adopt a similar gesture or posture. It's like a nonverbal way of saying, I'm with you, I'm tuned in.
It's like you're on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
All right, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about voice tone, because the guide points out that vocal variety is really important for keeping people engaged. And I know I can get stuck in a bit of a monotone sometimes.
Oh, yeah, that's a common thing. Think about it. Like, how much more engaging is it to listen to a speaker who varies their pitch, their pace, their volume? So the guide suggests practicing this. Pause for emphasis before you make a key point. Raise your pitch a little bit when you ask a question to convey curiosity, or slow down your speech when you want to be extra clear or create a sense of importance. It just adds this richness and dynamism to how you communicate.
It's like using your voice as an instrument, to convey not just the words, but the emotion, the intent behind them.
Exactly, yeah.
Then there's prosodic matching, which is aligning your speech patterns with the person you're talking to. That sounds really nuanced.
It is nuanced. It's about paying attention to the other person's rhythm and flow, their pace, the length of their pauses, maybe even their accent to some extent. But you got to be careful not to overtly mimic accents because that can be perceived negatively. But subtly adjusting your speech patterns to kind of match theirs can create this feeling of connection and understanding.
Right, like you're finding a comfortable rhythm together.
Yeah, exactly.
The guide also mentions that speaking in a lower pitch can make you sound more authoritative, especially in professional settings.
Yeah, there's some evidence to support that. And, if you're aiming to project more authority in certain situations, you can try to speak more from your diaphragm and cultivate a slightly lower tone. But you don't want to force it. It should feel natural.
Yeah, you don't want to sound like you're putting on a voice. Now, one thing that I think is absolutely crucial for any kind of real connection is presence. And that's being fully present in the moment without, all the distractions that we have in our lives. And it sounds so simple, but it's so hard to do these days.
It is a real challenge in our hyper-connected world, and Csikszentmihalyi's work on flow It highlights how important focused attention is for deep engagement.
Hmm.
So the guide's advice is to minimize distractions as much as possible. Put your phone away, silence notifications, make eye contact. It signals to the other person that you're giving them your undivided attention. You value their presence. It's a powerful nonverbal way to show respect and build connection.
Yeah, it's like giving someone the gift of your full attention.
Exactly.
And then this is a really interesting concept, the pratfall effect. This is the idea that making small, relatable mistakes can actually make you more likable.
I love this one.
I know, it's so counterintuitive.
It is. And Aronson's research showed this, you know. A little stumble, a minor blunder, as long as it doesn't, like, undermine your overall competence, it can make you seem more human, more relatable.
Makes you more approachable.
Yeah. So, you mispronounce a word, you spill a little bit of coffee, just laugh it off lightly. It takes the pressure off of being perfect.
Yeah, because none of us are perfect.
Yeah.
And then the guide touches on emotional activation, which is the idea that interactions that evoke some kind of emotion are more memorable and have more impact.
Exactly. And that's why storytelling is so powerful, you
Right.
know? Sharing stories that elicit a response, humor, empathy, excitement, even a little bit of vulnerability. It creates a stronger bond with the listener. So the guide encourages us to use storytelling to tap into that emotional level.
So like sharing a personal story that reveals a struggle that other people can relate to, or a moment of, genuine joy,
Exactly.
which leads us perfectly into the key elements of charisma that the guide outlines.
Right.
And it starts with authentic presence, which we already talked about, but this is that genuine engagement, being present in the moment.
And the authenticity is key. People can tell if you're just going through the motions. It's about being mentally and emotionally present as well as physically. So active listening, making eye contact, responding in a way that shows you're really absorbing what the other person is saying.
Then there's vulnerability. This can feel risky, but it's really about showing your imperfections, showing your humanity.
Right. Being selectively open, sharing appropriate personal experiences, maybe some challenges that you faced and what you learned from them, or times when you weren't at your best. It helps people to see you as a real person with strengths and weaknesses, and that builds empathy and connection.
And then confidence without arrogance,
Yeah.
which is a tough one to balance.
It is. It's about projecting that you believe in yourself and your abilities, but without needing to dominate the conversation or constantly seek validation. It's that quiet confidence that comes from self-acceptance, coupled with a genuine interest in others.
It's about being assertive, but also listening attentively, creating space for others to contribute their thoughts.
Exactly.
The guide also talks about expressiveness, communicating with a range of emotions.
Right. So if you're sharing something exciting, your tone and your energy should reflect that. If you're expressing empathy, your nonverbal cues should align with those feelings. It's about bringing your whole self to the interaction.
And finally, the foundation upon which all of this rests is warmth, having that genuine sense of goodwill towards others.
Absolutely. And this shows up in genuine smiles, offering sincere compliments, showing empathy and understanding, expressing appreciation. It's about conveying that you genuinely like and value the person you're interacting with.
And even small gestures, like a warm tone of voice or a sincere thank you, can go a long way.
They can.
All right, so we've talked about the psychology, the charisma. Now let's get into the practical stuff, like how to have engaging conversations and move beyond small talk. And the guide really emphasizes storytelling.
Yeah, and for good reason. Stories are how we connect emotionally, share experiences, transmit information, and it's a really engaging and memorable way to do it. So the guide highlights the STAR method as a structure for crafting stories: situation, task, action, and result.
So you're setting the scene, explaining the challenge that you faced, what you did about it, and what the outcome was.
Exactly. And using that framework can help you organize your thoughts and deliver your stories clearly and with impact.
And then to make those stories even more captivating, the guide says use vivid details. Engage the senses through your language.
Right. So instead of saying it was a beautiful day, you might describe, the shade of blue in the sky, the warmth of the sun on your skin, the sound of birds chirping. Those sensory details help the listener to really immerse themselves in the story.
It's about painting a picture with words.
Yeah.
And then there's the idea of emotional resonance, making sure your stories evoke some kind of feeling in your audience.
Right. So sharing your own emotions related to the story or highlighting the emotions of others who were involved creates a deeper connection. It goes beyond just the facts and lets the listener connect with the human experience in the story.
Yeah, it's not just a report of what happened.
Right.
Okay, so another fascinating concept is the curiosity gap. This is about intentionally creating a little gap in information to pique someone's interest, and make them want to know more.
Yeah, drawing on Lowenstein's research, the guide suggests that hinting at something interesting or asking a thought-provoking question without immediately giving the answer, you create that desire in the listener to learn more.
It's like a little cliffhanger.
Exactly.
You won't believe what happened next, dot, dot, dot.
Right.
Now, what about those situations where, you're at a party or you're just having these quick interactions?
Yeah, so for those shorter exchanges, the guide suggests conciseness. Aim for brief, engaging conversations, maybe around 2 minutes per person at a social event. This lets you circulate, meet more people, keep the energy flowing.
Right. You don't want to get stuck talking to one person all night. All right, let's talk about enthusiasm because I think this is so contagious.
It is. It's like you can feel it. Hatfield's research on emotional contagion shows that when you express genuine enthusiasm, it can actually influence the people around you.
Your energy is infectious.
It is.
Yeah.
And even when you're talking about something that might not seem inherently exciting, like your work, the guide emphasizes finding that authentic connection.
Yeah. You got to be genuine about it.
Yeah, people can tell when you're forcing it. So if you can connect it to something you really care about or link it to a broader trend or interest, it makes all the difference. Like if you work in data analysis but you're passionate about sports, you could connect your work to sports analytics.
Right. And you're going to be way more excited to talk about it.
Like-
And that leads to this broader point of always trying to connect the conversation to genuine interests. If you sense that the conversation is waning a little bit.
Yeah, it's about actively looking for that common ground. So if you discover someone loves to travel, you can steer the conversation towards travel. Finding that overlap keeps things flowing.
Makes it more interesting for both people. All right, finally, the guide highlights humor, surprise, and curiosity as being crucial for making conversations engaging and memorable.
Yes, shared laughter is a powerful thing, and the guide emphasizes affiliative humor. So those lighthearted jokes and stories that bring people together rather than putting them down. And surprise by offering those unexpected insights can make information more memorable. It's probably because our brains release dopamine when we're surprised. And cultivating genuine curiosity, approaching every interaction as an opportunity to learn something new, asking those open-ended, I wonder questions that makes you more interesting and encourages deeper engagement from others.
So to wrap up our deep dive today, we've covered a lot of ground. We explored the psychology of connection, the key elements of charisma, and a bunch of practical strategies for moving beyond small talk and having those more meaningful exchanges. And I think the recurring themes throughout all of this have been the power of being present, cultivating curiosity about others, and creating that sense of psychological safety in your interactions.
And for you listening as you go about your day, I want you to consider this. Pick one small, actionable thing that you can experiment with in your next social interaction. Maybe it's making an effort to maintain that open body language, or asking a more thoughtful follow-up question, or even sharing a quick story where you're not afraid to be a little bit imperfect.
Just one little tweak.
Yeah, one small change, and see how it shifts the dynamic of your interactions. What new aha moment might you discover about this fascinating world of human connection?
Thanks for joining us for the deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you then.